Welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. We're here to change the dialogue and stigma around what it means to feel good or be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. You deserve to feel good. We all deserve to feel good. And before we get started on our very, very special interview today, here is a little video about what we do in the cannabis space as nurses.
Change the paradigm of healthcare.
The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I'm the founder of Holistic Caring. We're based here in California, and we do educational programs and case management for patients on how to use cannabis therapeutically as a medicine.
We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing.
As the founder of Holistic Caring, I basically oversee the whole ship. And what we're doing is progressive education.
Cannabis actually supports all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or not do something. Because the plant was prohibited, it prevented health professionals, doctors, and nurses from learning about cannabis as medicine.
I want to change the paradigm of healthcare and us paving the way into a new vanguard of medicine.
It's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about teaching people how to feel good, bridging the gap from what they're not getting from traditional medicine, utilizing different plant medicines, adaptogens, tips, tricks, hugs, and nugs of information to support and nourish the most important system in our body.
And it's a lot of soul work, a lot of love, a lot of discipline, and meditation. I'm using my life work as a testimony to others to learn how they can be their own hero and then go help heal the world.
And we are, as nurses, the game changers. Oh, there you go. Growing your health,
Nice.
growing cannabis. Hey, everyone. My name is Sherry Mack, and I'm president of nursing, co-founder of Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse. I'm a cannabis nurse, patient, advocate, activist, and as you all know, a very passionate podcaster, here to change the paradigm of healthcare with my friend here, Elizabeth. I'm really too excited to announce this is my 7th year podcasting, The Green Nurse, Living Your Best Life. Started podcasting in 2018 when the National Council of State Boards of Nursing came out with the guidelines that all nurses must have 6 essential areas of knowledge when it comes to cannabis as medicine. Started podcasting to share compelling stories of healing, to decrease stigma, since I too use cannabis as medicine. But before we get started on our very, very excited show, we have a message from our sponsors at Bloom Hemp. Elizabeth.
Okay, so Bloom Hemp is a woman and nurse-owned national CBD supplier, leading with quality, safety, value, and patient-centered care. Bloom Hemp products are tested for quality, safety, and cannabinoid and terpene profiles, grown in the mountains of Colorado, and is one of the only CBD companies that has a free nurse line. So if you want to talk to a nurse, call 970-404-HOPE, 4673. And don't forget to use your coupon Green Nurse for 10% off and free shipping.
There we go.
There you go.
And we are back and really excited to announce the First Lady of Cannabis, Alice O'Leary Randall. Alice, I got to do a proper. Alice O'Leary Randall,
Yes.
along with her late husband, Robert C. Randall, played a pioneering role in the medical cannabis movement starting in 1976. I was 10 years old then. Robert was the first person in the United States to legally receive medical cannabis. For over 2 decades, Alice and Robert dedicated themselves tirelessly to challenging the prohibitions surrounding cannabis And following Robert's untimely passing in 2001, Alice transitioned into the field of hospice nursing and later became a grief counselor. After retiring from nursing in 2012, Alice reimmersed herself in the medical cannabis arena. She actively writes and speaks on the subject, having worked closely with Denver's Mary Medicinals for 5 years. In 2015, she developed the informative Cannabis Primer series, followed by Mary's Prime Time in 2017. Alice has served on the board of directors for the American Cannabis Nurses Association as an advisor for United in Compassion, an Australian medical cannabis organization. Alice is also an accomplished author with notable works including Medical Marijuana in America, a memoir of a pioneer published in 2014. She's written Pain Free with CBD, one of my first books in 2019, and her most recent publication, an e-publication volume titled Marijuana RX, The Early Days, 1976 to 1996. The story of American medical marijuana movement provides valuable insights into the origins of this movement. Alice, welcome to the show. You have no idea how grateful I am to have you on the show to share some of the missing historical information on medical cannabis. So thank you so much for being on this
you're welcome, Sherry.
And not giving up.
You're welcome, Sherry and Elizabeth. Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So you've been quite busy for the past 40 years trying to change cannabis
You might
law.
say that.
Yeah.
Closer
Yeah.
to 50, actually. But yes,
50.
it has been a busy time. Has been a very busy time. Well worth it, though. I'd do it again.
So Alice,
yeah.
as I was preparing for this interview, you know, I've read your book. I went to your website, which I'm going to share with our viewers. We've had some dialoguing back and forth. I went to your YouTube channel and I found a video on Good Morning America of Robert.
Uh-huh.
What do you think?
Oh, he was young then.
Viewers?
Oh, I think I always like to see Robert, so I think that'd be fun.
I think he's the cutest thing ever. So let's see what Robert has.
This was actually his first national TV interview. It was in January 77. He'd had legal marijuana for about 2.5 months at this point. So, or almost 3.
All right, here we go.
Let's do it.
Show the clip. Here we go.
Okay.
20 up right now. Robert Randall is in a very unusual court case. He has glaucoma, which is an eye disease that can cause blindness. He found that smoking marijuana helped his sight better than what the doctors prescribed for him, so he asked the government for permission to use the drug legally. But before the permission was granted, he was arrested for possession of marijuana, and the judge in Washington, D.C. dismissed the case because Mr. Randall was using the drug to keep from going blind. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
You won the case, and the government provides your marijuana. How does this work? What's the system?
Well, there are 2 separate cases obviously involved. One was the petition, which was directed against the federal government and was merely a request for legal access to quality control marijuana. That came through, and so now I'm receiving the marijuana from the government. But 2 weeks after that, the court case was decided. Right. And the court case said that my need for marijuana constituted a necessity, and the government could not infringe on that need. So
the government in growing, are you part really of a research project of some kind, or is this totally separated?
Well, this is the distinction. Yeah, the bureaucratic solution. In other words, the only way the bureaucracies could politically provide me with the marijuana, because there's a law against use of marijuana, was by making me a research subject, creating an entire research program for me, and that's been done in Washington, D.C. But of course, that has certain drawbacks to it. It seems like a privilege. There are 2 million people, at the very minimum in this country, who have glaucoma. And marijuana would appear to be effective medication on the basis of tests run by the government.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that a little bit later, by the way, because we've got a statement from the doctor at UCLA that I'm going to read later on that subject. How much do you smoke?
Right now, I'm smoking between 5 and 8 joints a day.
Now, I don't happen to smoke, so I don't know what that really would do to you? Are you high all the time? What kind of an effect
No,
does it have on you?
I think the problem that people have with marijuana is that it's a smoke drug, so they relate it to tobacco, and it makes you high, or it allows you to become high, so they relate it to alcohol. It's much different than that. The high that you get from marijuana is very self-induced, almost. It has very little to do with the drug and a great deal to do with your expectation.
So
If you expect to get high, you'll get high.
in other words, you feel
Very comfortable.
comfortable and normal all the time. Can you function?
Yes, quite well.
Well, what's glaucoma?
It's an eye disease where fluid builds up in the eye. There's fluid in the eye to maintain the shape of the eye, and the fluid simply builds up and impacts the optic nerve, causing the nerve to die.
Right. And so the marijuana.
Yes, all
accomplishes
conventional therapy is to bring the pressure in the eye down,
Right.
so that you don't have that impact against the optic nerve.
Yeah. Was there, at your trial, was there medical testimony?
Yes, there was. There was medical testimony from physicians at UCLA who had, for 5 years, researched marijuana's relationship to eye pressure. And then there was medical testimony from my own doctor of 4 years in Washington.
Yeah. Where do you smoke? I mean, would you smoke, for instance, this morning here?
It's a little early to smoke yet. My medication schedule would about 4 hours after I wake up.
Yeah. And you're on a regular schedule?
Mm-hmm. Just like any medication.
Hey, let me read that statement, by the way, from Dr. Sidney Cohen, who was the investigator at the UCLA project, marijuana project in California. Dr. Cohen told us yesterday on the phone, quote, most patients who have glaucoma benefit from the conventional medications which are available. For those few who do not, marijuana, the active, or THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, could provide some help. However, it is still an investigational drug and not available for general use, unquote. I'm reading this only because we certainly cannot endorse people because of the people you mentioned. There are a lot of people with glaucoma whom I assume should see their doctors, should they not, and discuss it?
They should, but one of the great problems in the entire area is that the medical profession really does have very little knowledge on marijuana. The law has disallowed research in marijuana. The law prevents, for instance, there's no reason for a doctor to learn about an illegal substance. He's never going to have to use it. And so you end up with doctors knowing as little as the general population.
What are the broadest implications of this case of yours, do you think?
Well, I think the broadest ones are that it blatantly shows that the law, that something is seriously wrong with the law. Had I paid attention to that law, been an obedient citizen, believed that the legislators were acting in my best interest, I'd now be blind.
You would be now?
Yes.
Are you blind in either or
I'm
eye or partially?
blind in this eye. Yes, I'm partially blind in this eye.
Are you worried about going blind now?
Well, I think you always worry about going blind. I don't think there's a point where you quit. But it is obvious that the marijuana seems to be stabilizing the condition.
It does?
Yes.
So you're not as concerned as you were before?
I'm not nearly as concerned as I was before, especially having access to a drug which is now controlled in quality. When you're dealing with street marijuana, of course, you don't have that.
In the
luxury.
vernacular, you hear the term good stuff. Does the government grow good stuff?
It does, yeah.
It does?
Yeah.
So you get high quality.
A high quality marijuana, which is consistently controlled.
What do you recommend, based on your experience, and you've become obviously very articulate in this whole area, even concerning the legal ramifications, what do you recommend the government do for your personal?
I'm very fearful that people will think that a solution has been found. Of course, a solution has been found for me, but it hasn't been found for other people with glaucoma or other people with conditions that marijuana might help. I think it would be very dangerous at this point to leave it in the hands of the bureaucracies. I dealt with the bureaucracies. They were as fair to me as possible, but it took 6 months for me to get a critical medication. And I think that the bureaucracies are in a great deal of trouble and confused. I think what needs to be done is the Congress needs to review the law itself.
So Congress has to get involved? And
yes, I think Congress does. I think they'd rather not, but I think it's time that they do.
Thank you, Mr. Randall.
Thank you
very much for being with us this morning. 46 after right now. We'll be back with really a throwback to the past, a bounty hunter after these.
That's my guy.
Yeah. Wow. And how does that make you feel, Alice? Because I'll tell you, when I was watching him and I was looking at the photos and I was looking through your memorabilia, I'm telling you, my heart was so full.
Well, my heart is very, very full. it's wonderful to see him so young again and relatively healthy. And what I love about that clip in '77 is you can put it up against the one where 10 years later, where he's on Larry King. It's exactly the same. He was so on point at the very beginning, and it never wavered. It was always about, this is wrong. Other people need it just like I do. And when are they going to get around to changing this? It never wavered. He was remarkable in that regard. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he was just a terrific guy with a very big heart, very big heart.
Yeah, that was the first. I did not see that Sherry was preparing, so that was the first time I saw that clip. And he was very articulate, very smart, very well spoken,
Yes.
very informed.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Well, he had a master's degree in rhetoric, which is the art of public persuasion.
Okay.
So there could not have been a better person to tap on the shoulder and say, "Hey, go out and solve this problem."
Wow.
He was exceptionally articulate, very much so. Yeah, he was a wonderful man, truly.
Amazing. Well, what did he do with his career? What was he working in?
He was a college professor when we were busted in August of 1975. He was teaching at a nearby junior college. He hoped to be a speechwriter. That's why he came to Washington, D.C. And he ended up driving a cab instead, as things happen. And it's while he was driving the cab that he realized his vision really was terrible.
That was my question. Like, when did he realize that he had a problem with his eyes? Because glaucoma treatment back then, like as we discussed, wasn't as advanced as it is today.
No, not at all. And actually, Robert, in our book, he talks about sitting in an optometrist's office when he's about 17 years old and picking up a pamphlet called Glaucoma, the Sneak Thief of Sight. And he read this brochure and he said, "Gosh, that sounds like what I'm going through." And he showed it to the optometrist, and the optometrist just blew him off. He said, "Oh, don't be silly, son. Only old people get glaucoma. You're way too young to get glaucoma." Well, the fact of the matter is you can be born with glaucoma, which Robert probably was. The real problems probably began manifesting when he was in his early teens. And, but, only old people get glaucoma. So he was 24 when he was diagnosed.
Okay.
And that was in Washington.
Alice, how did you meet him? How did you meet Robert?
Robert and I met in college in Florida. We both grew up in Sarasota. And our paths crossed a couple of times. We worked at the same amateur theater together. We lived in the same neighborhood for a while, but we didn't really meet until we went to junior college in Bradenton, Florida, and then on to the University of South Florida in Tampa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. And so how did he discover cannabis? Like, we know it's back in the 70s and, cannabis.
60s. Yeah.
Okay.
How did we score cannabis? Was that the question?
How did he score? How did he discover?
Discover. Oh, that's very interesting, because all through college, whenever we would have marijuana, I noticed Robert, we'd be smoking and he'd be doing this, with his eyes. And he was noticing the difference when he smoked, that he could see better. But he never put the pieces together. And then when he moved to Washington, D.C., the connections dried up. He had no marijuana for many months. And that's when the glaucoma became very aggressive, because he wasn't medicating. And that's what sent him to the ophthalmologist. And then a newfound friend in Washington one night gave him a joint, and he took it home. And he was getting ready to smoke the joint. He looked out the window and there were halos around streetlights, which was a sign that his pressure was elevated. So he just, let out a heavy sigh, got himself a big glass of Coca-Cola. He loved Coca-Cola. Sat down to listen to some music, smoked the joint, got up a little while later to go back to the kitchen, looked out the window, the halos were gone. And in our book, he talks about this being a seminal moment. He knew immediately what had happened. And he talks about it in such terms that it's like he knows about the ECS, but he doesn't know. You know what I mean? He feels this thing happening inside of him, but of course the science, it would be another 20 years before we discovered the endogenous cannabinoid system. So he was just going on feelings and instinct, but he knew at that moment that marijuana was helping him. And then he went, no, I got to be stoned. That can't be real. But the thought wouldn't go away. And he kept testing it. He kept testing it. He told me about it. I laughed. I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever. Marijuana as a medicine, sure, Bobby, right? But it, there was no medical marijuana in the 1970s. Harry Anslinger and all of his gang there, the DEA, they didn't do very good about stopping recreational marijuana, but they did a real good job about stopping medical marijuana. And so it just didn't exist in the American consciousness. But it did not take me long to realize that, yeah, it really was helping him. You could see it in the way he moved. He was more confident in the way he moved, and he could read better. It became very obvious. And so then we did everything we could to keep ourselves in supply of marijuana. And that wasn't always easy.
And you grew it, correct? That's how he ended up growing?
Yeah. Yeah, we had 4 plants growing on our sun deck, and through a simple twist of fate, really, we got busted. We actually weren't there. We had gone out to Indiana to visit some friends. We came home, our house was ransacked. We thought we must have been robbed. And then we found the search warrant on the kitchen table with a little scribble thing saying, "Turn yourself in." I mean, it was, I look back on it now, it's hysterical. But it at the time, it turned our lives upside down, truly. It did. So
did you turn yourselves in, or did they
of
come back?
course.
Okay.
No, they did not come back. No, we turned ourselves in. And at that time, we met our lawyer. I knew like one lawyer in Washington at the time. I called him up. He came down to the arraignment with us. Bob told him on that day, he said, "Paul, I use marijuana to treat my glaucoma, to treat my eye disease. What should I do about that?" And Paul, God bless him, he stifled that laugh that he wanted to. So he just had this lawyerly smirk on his face and said, "Well, Bobby, prove it." Well, Bobby did. So, and that's how we got started. We got some information from Normal that, and it had some information from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and that gave us some avenues to explore. And so we did, and pretty soon we were really immersed in the whole issue, truly. Yeah.
So in 1976, he became the first person to gain legal medical access to cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the story.
That's
about
correct.
How did that come about?
Well, it was really a two-pronged situation. We'd been arrested. Obviously, we were facing charges. We could have paid I think a $250 fine, because it was really just a misdemeanor charge. But we decided to fight it, and the lawyers that we had, they got excited about it. They could see right away that this could be a case that, if we could prove it, which Bobby did, it could really go somewhere. So we had the criminal case, and then we also had a civil case. We filed a petition with the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the FDA, and the DEA, asking permission to use their supplies of marijuana to treat Robert's glaucoma. We were very fortunate. We were able to get Robert into the UCLA study that was run by Dr. Robert Hepler. And it was almost on the verge of shutting down when Robert called Dr. Hepler. But we got him in. Normal paid for his fare to go out to California, and he was at UCLA for 10 days. They treated him with every possible combination of conventional glaucoma medications. They tried THC capsules, and they tried smoked marijuana. The only thing that worked was a combination of the conventional medications, eye drops, and the marijuana. Conventional medications alone didn't work. Marijuana alone didn't work. You put them together, Robert was able to save his sight.
Wow.
So we had that information to go to court with, and we did, and we prevailed. So
it's wonderful
yeah.
synchronicity that Normal pitched in and helped him get to California and knew about the trial and got him in and got that data to then go back into the courtroom, which influenced everything.
Exactly.
After that. Yeah.
Right. And not only the courtroom, but also the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They looked at this data. There was no denying this data. Marijuana was critical to Robert's eyesight. Well, none of those agencies ever expected a single individual, to walk up to their door and go, "Excuse me, I need marijuana medically." They were all prepared for onslaughts from Normal and any other any other organization you can think of, and lawyers and all that. They had never considered the power of a single individual coming in and saying, "I have incontrovertible proof that I need marijuana. What are you going to do about it?" They had to act affirmatively. But they made very clear that nobody else was going to get through that way. They weren't happy about it, but there wasn't much they could do, frankly. There really wasn't. They tried hard, but there wasn't anything they could do. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I so love about, investigating the historical aspect of what Robert and you did is you guys, you were able to get him medical cannabis from the government. I want you to share that story of how he has it mailed to him. And then you continue to fight for other patients to get cannabis, because that's incredible. I mean, he didn't stop. He didn't stop helping people, and neither did you. And I just
No, he did. Well, when we first got arrested, we really pulled inward. We didn't think anybody else knew about marijuana as medicine. We thought this was something we had discovered all on our own, And then after the arrest, to discover that the National Institute on Drug Abuse had been doing these tests, well, it made us angry. And so we decided, okay, let's try to get it for Bob. Well, once it became obvious that we were going to succeed doing that, then we start to look around us, and the publicity in the case started, and we immediately started getting letters from other people saying, "Hey, I live in Maryland and I have MS, and I noticed when I smoke marijuana, it seems to help me too." Or a glaucoma patient from somewhere else. I mean, we immediately started hearing from people. The government would have liked nothing better for Robert to take the marijuana, quietly go back to his teaching, not tell anybody else about it, but we couldn't do that. There were too many other people that it was obvious they needed this, just like Robert did. And I think we were both raised as people who, we believed in the American way. We believed that if you proved your case and walked up to agencies, they'd be there to help you. And that, that initial naivete got us started. And then, the rest we just kept going. So.
Well, yeah, and that whole impetus that happened to me too, right? When I crashed my bicycle at the end of 2014, I was introduced to CBD at my chiropractor's office as a topical, and ended up taking CBD internally with some capsules that I was able to buy, and I started to heal. And then I started to heal from not only the injury, but everything else that was wrong with me for 20 years. And I said, if I can help myself, I have to help others. And it's a natural inclination for people like us.
I think it is. Yes, I think it is.
Yeah. And I remember too, when I first started, it was interesting because it was a 70-year-old nurse that came to my house when I was sick and suffering on N18 pharmaceuticals and couldn't take care of my kids and couldn't work. Came to my house and she brought me a joint. She was a nurse. She was actually a nurse at college in Massachusetts, and her father was a pharmacist who actually carried cannabis in his pharmacy prior to 1937. So she came to my house and She held up the joint and she goes, Sherry, get with the program. She goes, cannabis is 70 years old. I looked at her at the joint and I go, what, are you kidding me? You're bringing me weed? Like, how is this going to help? She disclosed, she goes, Sherry, I want to tell you something. I've been using cannabis every day since I was 17. That's 53 years using cannabis, just a little bit. I'm not on any pharmaceuticals and I've never been hospitalized. And as a matter of fact, my father carried it in his pharmacy.
Yeah.
There you go.
Had
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah. Sure. Well, nurses are the most trustworthy, you know.
Yeah, 22 years in a row. And I
Yeah,
love,
that's right.
I don't know where we are in the questions, but I love what you said about the DEA was very successful at shutting down medical cannabis, obviously not recreational because people still had it, but shutting
Right.
down medical cannabis. Speak to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well, I mean, Harry Anslinger clearly set out to do that, and then he got it removed from the pharmacopoeia. He made it, you know, the 1937 Tax Act said that doctors could still use it, but then they made the system so convoluted that it was just impossible to get easily. I mean, we didn't have faxes then, we didn't have email. You had to fill out all these forms, take them to the post office, send them, wait. They would send it back, say, no, you need to do it this way. You know, I mean, the same old runaround, but with none of the technology. But he was, well, Harry Anslinger, let's not go there because I could spend an hour talking about Harry Anslinger. But he was clearly trying to shut that reputable use of this plant down. And he did a very good job of it. And there were so many other new medications, exciting medications coming down the pipeline, you know, the penicillins, the sulfur drugs, the antibiotics. You can't blame the medical profession for being distracted, shall we say. But I think some, sorry?
You can see the corruption, the influence of pharmaceuticals and you know, pain medications as opposed to using something that's more natural. Because, you know, we specific the word naivete. Did he really think that the recreational use was going to be shut down? Like in Reefer Madness, where people were just enjoying it. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's not a good thing to go too far into Harry Anslinger's mind, I think. But you know, he really did a number on the medical use side. And when I think of the years of lost research, you know, those 40, 50 years there where we just, you know, there was just nothing happening with this plant. Whereas I know in Czechoslovakia in the 1950s, they were looking into it. They were making a whole compendium of plants with medicinal use. And that's one country where some study continued to go on. So study was continuing. It's not like medical cannabis disappeared into the ethers entirely, but it was you know, oh, it's just folklore. It's just folk medicine. That's the term I remember. Folk medicine, you know. Well, yeah, you bet. It's folk medicine, and the folks should have it for sure. So,
yeah. And so in 1978, you started working for Normal and established the Medical Classification Project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a fun period for me, actually. We were hearing from so many people, and we were trying to answer them all, and we didn't have a lot of money at that point, and we went to Normal and said, hey, could we, and Normal was very good. I mean, we would write letters to people and take them down to Normal, and Normal would post them for us. I mean, we just, and they would help out with printing costs and that kind of stuff. So eventually it became obvious, let's go to Normal and see if they'd hire us. Well, they wanted Robert most of all, but Robert was he wasn't an organizational guy. He would not have fit in there at all. So we offered me, and I started there in January of '78, which 1978 was a pretty eventful year. That was the year that New Mexico first passed the first law. There was a young man in California by the name of Craig Reichardt who had a judge order the local sheriff to deliver cannabis to this young man with cancer. There were 4 states total in that year of 1978, And the medical reclassification project was just right in the middle of it because everybody knew Normal. So they'd call Normal and say, hey, we need information. And they say, well, hold on, here's Alice. So it was just the perfect point. And, you know, Robert and I, we were a good partnership. I enjoyed doing all that kind of organizational work. Robert, no, not so much. So it worked out really well for me and for the movement, I think. I was there for 3 years, and that was during the period of time when the states were passing what was called the Controlled Substances Therapeutic Research Act. And there, in the end, we had like 34 states that enacted this type of legislation. The idea being that the state would conduct research using the federal government's marijuana supplies. And we thought, this is great. The government wants research. We can give them research. It's, you know, controlled by the states. And then, 5 years, everything will be legalized. It'll be great. Well, it didn't really work out that way. You know, the government did not want, it turns out the government did not want research. Not really. No, not really. No. But for that period of time, for that 3 years, it was the medical reclassification project was kind of the center point for people looking for information, either individuals or states. And I learned a lot. It was a great experience for me. And Normal was very helpful all along the way. We had our good times and our bad times with them, but for the most part, they were very supportive, and they deserve to be recognized for that.
And I'm sure you saw a lot of political shifting at that time, right? We all know 1970, the Controlled Substance Act, Richard Nixon,
Yeah.
then, you know, Carter and Ford and Reagan. How did that influence things?
Well, you know, you mentioned Carter. Carter was for decriminalization.
Right.
So when he came into office, that was in '76. I mean, that was the year that Robert got his marijuana. Carter was elected in '76 and then came into office in '77. So we thought, hey, this is great. You know, surely President Carter would be in favor of this. Bob at one point wrote to his drug advisor, who was a man by the name of Peter Bourne. Robert thought that Dr. Bourne would help him because the agencies were really pressuring Bob, telling him, you know, you either shut up or we take your supplies away. They were, you know, oh yeah, they were really. And so Bob wrote to Dr. Bourne, the advisor to the President of the United States, thinking, well, thinking he'd stand up and say, well, we're not going to stand for this. Well, Dr. Bourne wrote back and said, you know, Bob, if you don't shut up, they're going to take your supplies away. Seriously, he did. So, you know, that Robert knew right away, okay, so you're threatening my right to freedom of speech by taking away my critical medicine. I mean, it was a tremendously foolish move on the part of the advisor to the president. But Robert just kind of kept that letter quietly to himself for a while. And then it came in handy in 1978. They being the federal government, managed to lure away Robert's doctor from Washington, D.C. His name was Dr. Merritt. He moved to North Carolina. Robert couldn't find another doctor. What a surprise. I mean, no doctor wanted to go near this case, right? So Robert's supplies were taken away in 1978, beginning of 1978. And that letter from the presidential drug advisor became the cornerstone in a civil suit, Randall versus the United States, which was in May of 1978. And it was that case that established the Compassionate IND program, which allowed a dozen or so. At one point, we were up to close to 20 people receiving supplies of federal marijuana for medical use for a wide variety of ailments. So what seemed like a terrible thing when the government took Robert's medicine away, in the end turned out to be a pretty good thing because we were able to get other people into the program and start building. It was always a process of building, one brick on the other. you know. So.
And we're still building.
Yes, you are. Good luck,
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forward to the 1990s. How did the AIDS
Okay.
crisis impact medical cannabis reform?
HIV and AIDS.
HIV and AIDS. Wow, what a time.
Brownie Mary, I
we,
asked you about if you had met her.
Yeah, I've met, of course I met Brownie. I met Mary.
Mary
But Mary Rathburn, but Mary and Dennis and those folks were on the West Coast. We were on the East Coast. You know, we started an organization called the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics. That was in 1980. And as early as 1983, we started receiving phone calls from AIDS patients who said, you know, when I use marijuana, I feel so much better. And Bob would say, hey, well, why don't we get you, we'll get you a compassionate IND. We'll get you legal marijuana. No, I don't have time for that. I just wanted you to know that marijuana is important to people with AIDS. We had one young man who called us. He had been tracking when he had marijuana and when he didn't, what his T cell counts were. When he had marijuana, his T cell counts went up. When he didn't have marijuana, they went down. And he said, I don't, something's going on with my immune system in marijuana. He said, I just want you to know that. But it was such an awful time because AZT was the only medicine they had. It wasn't very effective. And people were just dying. They didn't have the time to make the fight. Finally, one patient in 1989, his name was Steve. He lived in Texas, and he set out to find us. He knew that we existed somewhere. He had AIDS. He contracted it from a dirty needle, and he wanted to get marijuana legally because he knew it was helping him feel better, and he knew it was important to AIDS. So he tracked us down. We were able to get him into the Compassionate IND program. And that started, he was very keen on, I want to make news. I want to get this story out to others. So we made news for him and we got the story out. And Steve died, Steve died in February of 1990. High Times Magazine called not long after Steve's death and said, wow, this is really an interesting story. Would you write an obituary? Bob said, of course I will. So wrote an obituary. It got into the April issue of High Times. And in Panama City Beach, Florida, there was a young couple by the name of Barbara and Kenny Jenks who were just getting out of jail. They had been arrested for growing some marijuana. I think they had 3 plants in the back bedroom of their trailer in Panama City Beach. And Kenny said, I'm going to go to 7-Eleven. I'm going to buy a High Times magazine. We'll find a lawyer. Well, they didn't find a lawyer. What they found was Steve's obituary. Now, they were kind of like Bob and I. They thought they were operating in this quiet little orbit where only they knew it was, helping them. And suddenly their world just exploded. They called Bob. Of course, we helped. We got them into the Compassionate IND program. And then we established a program called the Marijuana AIDS Research Service, or MARS, which was designed to help all AIDS patients get marijuana legally. Because what we had learned with AIDS was that the forms that you had to fill out for the government became remarkably easy. AIDS is such a predictable disease, and all patients have, for the most part, similar symptoms. So you create a checklist. The patient could sit down with a doctor, and within 20 minutes, they could complete this IND application. And so we had a donor at that point. We had a benefactor by the name of Rich Dennis, who flew us to Chicago, where we announced it. He had closed circuit TV to AIDS groups all over the country, so they could see the announcement of this program. Before the announcement was done, the phone in Washington was ringing, and I was picking up as AIDS patients saying, "Where do I get this? Can you send it out to me today?" Hundreds hundreds and hundreds of people sent in this application to FDA. Well, we knew there would be one or two reactions. They'd either open their hearts and be compassionate and expand the compassionate IND program and get any AIDS patient who wanted it marijuana, or they'd shut the program down. They shut the program down. The government's reaction, that was in 1991, 92. It took them a while to close it down because they said they were going to close it down, and people got so upset that they backed off. So there's so much cruelty in that time, which I'm not going to go into but trust me, there was so much cruelty in that time. It was astonishing. So they tried to close the program down, and it made people really mad. In the period of time between 1976 and 1991, America learned that marijuana has medical value. There were all those states back in the 70s and in the early 80s. There was Robert out there talking every chance he could. And, word of mouth. Oh, hey, yeah, my Uncle Joe uses that. He says it makes his prostate feel better. Did you know that? I mean, there were all kinds of things going around. And America had become very sophisticated with their knowledge about medical marijuana. And when they realized the government was trying to shut down the only legal program for access, Americans, they didn't take it. So they were very annoyed and wrote their congressmen, wrote to their newspapers wrote editorials. And out in California, Brownie Mary, Dennis Perrone, Scott Imler, so many good people. They said, we got to do something about this. So it started with San Francisco passing Prop P, which was just a citywide initiative. And it really didn't do much other than tell the police not to arrest people using marijuana medically. But that evolved into Prop 215. Mm-hmm. And the rest, as they say, is history. I like to think of it as the government getting hoisted on their own petard, because they shut this down and they thought, okay, we got them now. Shut it down. Well, it just exploded. And they blew it. Good. So.
Right. They shut down the program benefiting 20-some people, but then they opened up Pandora's box to open it up.
That's exactly right.
And millions.
That's exactly right.
And
exactly right, Elizabeth.
From just the medical approach for a few to everybody needs access to this. And I love how in 1996 I voted for it. I've been here forever. And I remember everybody starting to say, well, how do I get marijuana? And I remember, I was a nurse back then and working in hospitals, and we would have joints here and there, not that much, but we lost the fear of being arrested, really. And for the most part, we weren't growing or we weren't doing anything like that, and there wasn't any dispensaries to speak of. But right, right. It was a slow build to just getting some kind of allowability for this plant to exist in the context of it makes me feel better, and that's all right.
Yeah, exactly right. And of course, the DEA tried to shut down those early. Dennis Perrone had a smoking room. I can't remember what he called it, but people came there, and there was cannabis available, and so they tried to shut it down in California. They tried when Oregon passed their law, I think the next year or maybe 2 years. They tried to close those down. I mean, DEA tried to stop it, but it was too big at that point. I mean, they had just stomped on people for so long, but people get tired of being stomped on, and they had so many opportunities to handle it properly, and they blew every one of them. They just because I don't know, they just. It's the Harry Anslinger thing. It's all I keep. My head just comes back constantly to. They couldn't get rid of the ghost of Harry Anslinger. I swear.
Anslinger, I call him Asslinger.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was a CNN junkie for a long time, and I watched all the weed series when they were live back in, when Sanjay Gupta started doing that, and Sherry and I have been watching them the last week or so in preparation for numerous things she's working on to really give that history. And we were watching Jeff Sessions the other day, and he could have been, the next Ariane Slater.
He could have. You bring up that weed documentary. That was so important. In 2013, his first one, that was the first time America saw a figure of authority stand in front of a camera and say, I was wrong. I had it wrong. And that is what America was waiting for. And after he did that show, wow, CBD laws only. I mean, we had those for a while, the CBD only laws, but it just spiked up tremendously. He gave it legitimacy that America had been waiting for, that authoritative figure. And it turned out to be Sanjay Gupta. He was a doctor. He wouldn't lie to us, right? He's a doctor, and he's on TV.
and watching the trajectory of all of these families with Charlotte Figge leading, right? And that expose of showing how this was so remarkable, from 300 seizures a week to one or two. And then all of the other people. Now, why did the government not, because you were in history back then, not open up another round of the investigation on new drugs, and that we're going to then take the CBD into the government, and they already had a patent on it.
I know. It's so confusing.
Patent number, right? We all know that number.
Yeah, they just got, the government's just so locked in so many lies, they don't know what they're saying anymore. And I hope something comes out of this Biden request, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if DEA said, nope, but let's hope they won't. Let's hope a request from the President of the United States carries a little more weight than the endless number of petitions they've had from just us common citizens, Let's hope.
It's been petitioned numerous times to reschedule. I think at least 10 rescheduling.
Oh,
now.
yes. Yeah. And we
for the viewers,
we were very involved.
For the new people that are listening, let's talk about what's going on with the government, because some people aren't.
And what Schedule 1 is.
Yeah, so Schedule 1, Elizabeth.
Okay, Schedule 1, no medical benefits, highly addictive, dangerous, abusive, and even under clinical supervision, you can't use it. And we know that hypocrisy.
Right.
We have 38 states.
Yeah, 38 states, 24 with adult use. And the ploy now is to reschedule to Schedule 3, where Marinol is, synthetic THC, testosterone, benign things that are still a pharmaceutical route. We have to keep the botanical ones with the dispensaries, but having access for physicians to be able to prescribe.
All right, but so DEA is the one that does the descheduling or rescheduling, and so the HHS and the FDA have written letters to the DEA to either deschedule or reschedule.
Reschedule. Yeah, but DEA has the final authority. We went through this in the 80s. From 1986 to 88, we had hearings before the chief administrative law judge of the DEA. We brought forth dozens of patients. We had 34 state laws that had tried to set up these Controlled Substances Therapeutic Research Act programs. We had a lot of evidence, and Judge Young said, yeah, it should be rescheduled, absolutely. And the DEA rejected that. Well, we went to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals we went to the Court of Appeals 3 times, I think. Eventually they said, the DEA has the right, the DEA administrator has the absolute right to schedule or not reschedule. This is what worries me. In the regs, the DEA administrator is the final person here. But let's hope, I'm praying for I'm praying. I'm praying.
And Mildred is going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
What's a miracle, right? We need a miracle, and a true miracle is a change of perception, that aha moment when it just makes sense. That's what we're hoping for.
That's what we're hoping for. Yes.
Their perception Cannabis is medicine, period. End of story.
And then we changed the paradigm of healthcare
That's
to
it.
include it.
Right.
Include.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the federal government is the only one that hasn't admitted that cannabis is medical, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get back a little bit to Robert's story a little bit, right? You know,
Okay.
Robert became a victim of AIDS, right? In 1995, I think you had told
Mhm.
me. And so let's talk
Yes.
about those days and how you were feeling about the issue and your accomplishments and how, and did Robert use medical cannabis for his symptoms? What was going on
Well,
there?
you know, Robert's a very interesting case because he probably when he was first diagnosed, which was with AIDS, which was in '94, he had very few T cells left. He had 20, I think, at that point. You're supposed to have like 2,000. But he was 50 pounds overweight. He'd been traveling to Europe. He'd been doing speaking engagements all around the country. He was not your normal AIDS patient. He did have pneumonia. That's what finally got him to the doctor. And the doctor thought that he had probably been infected with AIDS probably in the late 70s, maybe, was his thinking. So it's kind of a miracle I didn't get it. Apparently, there are some people who have a genetic makeup that they can fight off HIV, which is pretty amazing. So thankfully, I never contracted it. But Robert went through all of this time until 1994. But when it hit him really hard. And he had pneumonia. He was quite ill. Then his gallbladder, terrible things started happening with his gallbladder. He had all kinds of complications. We decided, let's pack it up and go home. Let's go home to family. We need more support than just Alice can give. Alice needed support. It was a very difficult time. I really thought there were 2 times in 1995 that I thought we were going to lose him. But through, I can't say it was the miracle of cannabis this time, folks. It was a miracle of good doctoring and good nursing. We had a wonderful nurse named Pat Kelly. If you're listening, Pat, thank you. And she just nursed Robert wonderfully. And we also had a wonderful doctor who figured out that the problem was he was taking this medication to not have the pneumonia come back, and it ended up first killing his gallbladder, and then it went after his pancreas, and his pancreas blew up to the size of like a small football that a kid plays with, and that nearly killed him. But by the time he got through all of this and came out on the other side, the new cocktails had arrived. The HIV cocktails, AIDS cocktails had arrived, the 3 medications. And he could take 2 of them. When they added the third, everything went haywire, but he was able to tolerate 2 of them. And that gave us another 6 years. We had 6 really good years in Florida. We were able to write our autobiography, which is the Marijuana RX book. And I'm so grateful for that because I forget things and I go to the book and I can remember them. You know, it's a long time ago at this point. And Robert insisted on everything being in that book. And you can see here it is right now. And you can see it's not a short book. It's everything is in this book. And I'm so grateful to him for insisting on that because it's just been such. And then we insisted to the publisher that it have an index. So, and for those of you out there who don't know what index is, it's the search feature on a hard copy book. Okay. So it's been a wonderful resource for me. And that's the book that I've taken recently and made into an EPUB with all of the links that link to the court decisions, to news articles, to the state laws, to articles and pictures about the people that we worked with. And so that was a really good time for us. And I'm just very grateful. Bob passed away in 2001.
2001.
And something else happened in 2001. What happened with you?
What happened with me? in 2001.
You
Yeah,
returned
You became a nurse.
to school.
No, that was a couple of years later.
Okay.
I went back to, I needed a break from marijuana. I did. And Robert wasn't there, and I needed a break. And my sister said, "Well, if you could do anything at all, what would it be?" And I said, "Well, I'd work for hospice." And she said, "Well, what's stopping you?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a nurse." She said, "Well, what's stopping you?" So I went back to school, and I was 54 years old. I'm an LPN. I went to the practical nurse route. I just didn't think I could do 3 years in college. And I'm really glad I did that, because registered nurses these days, I love them all, but in hospice for the most part, they're paper pushers. There's a lot of paperwork. I ended up in a hospice house doing patient care, which was what I wanted to do, and I was caring for patients. And honestly, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I'm so glad I did that. Then I retired in 2012. People started calling me and saying, "Hey, will you come here and speak? Will you come there and speak?" And I thought, geez, I'd better find out what's going on out there. It was a new universe. It was a whole new universe. So in 2014, I threw the dog in the van. We went cross country. I stopped in Denver. That's where I met the good folks at Mary's Medicinals, Nicole and Lynn. Met Nurse Marcy, and met a lot of wonderful people there. Then up to Oregon to the Patients Out of Time conference. Met more wonderful people, learned a lot, and ended up working with Mary's Medicinals for 5 years as their ambassador and their educational program, as you've already mentioned. Yeah, it was wonderful. I've had a wonderful life. I really have. It's just been extraordinary.
I love Mary's Medicinals, and I love the primer that you built for them. That was some of the early work that trained me.
Well, thank you. I love doing it. And, they would print up thousands of copies and give them to the dispensaries, and they just went out everywhere. I was amazed at how far and wide it went. It was great. And then the Mary's prime time, I was going to conferences literally around the world and reporting on these conferences, because, oh my God, the research during that time was coming left and right. It still is, right? So that was fun too, to be able to report on that and tell people what the scientists were doing. It was this plant is, I speak of it as the universe. It's constantly going outward, learning more, showing more, displaying more to us. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to have been involved in.
And it's so wonderful that you have stepped back into the space and are continuing to educate and are continuing, to bring it's legacy work, historical, medical legacy work to the forefront with information that has been missing for so long. So I want to share your website.
I like that.
First.
Please. Yeah.
How do people find you and shop and buy the primer, buy the book, everything?
There you go.
There it is. There it is.
Medical Cannabis Historical Memorabilia Store. And there's a link in the show notes that you can go. Okay. This is Alice O'Leary Randall's page, her shop, Home Resources, the Santa Cruz Movement, Project 50, Robert and Alice, the Memory Blog, and the Memorabilia Store. Let's take a peek at some of this stuff here. Groundhog Day is one of Robert's favorite holidays. To learn why, visit the Memory Blog. To celebrate, all memorabilia products are on sale for the month of February, 50% off. Everything, use the discount code HOG. Woohoo! But
there's the PDF.
Yep, we have the book. And so we have the book here. Then you have, let's talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah, these are little monographs that just tell little stories. And they're short, easy to digest. And these are all available EPUB or hard copy. So
there you go.
And then the tins are a big favorite. I have one right here.
Quick, look at that tin.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
300
people-
cigarettes per 10.
Yes, yep. And by the way, it wasn't very good marijuana in that Good Morning America thing. He says the government's marijuana is pretty good. His opinion changed on that over the years, and it was never really any higher than 2.6% THC content, which is so laughable in today's world. But it saved his sight. He still had his sight at the time of his death, and that's 20 years.
Wow.
So it may have been low THC, but it did the job. So I think that's important for medical users. That you don't have to get to that high THC stuff. In fact, that can be very detrimental to you. So
therapeutic use of cannabis. We need to find the balance, right? We don't want to.
That's right.
THC, what happens? Your body says, "Oh, I don't need to make my own anandamide. So what am I going to do? My receptors are going to hide." Right. So we want the goal of taking cannabis is to do what?
To
function.
Tune the ECS.
Tune the ECS.
Function. Yeah.
A cell signal.
I like it.
Exactly. It's to function. And live our best life. So Alice, this has been an absolutely amazing show. We did have a couple slides to show, but we don't need to show them because we've covered so much. You've really been an amazing guest. I'm so grateful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh,
so it's great to spend some time with you too. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So this show is going to be, this is on YouTube. It's been streamed on multiple different platforms. Don't hang up. I'm gonna just close out the show, and we'll have you back on because I think there's some more work we need to do for sure. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I know our viewers would greatly appreciate to hear from you as well.
I'd love to do it. Of course. You got it.
All right. And so this wraps
Thank you very much.
Episode of The Green Nurse, Living Your Best Life. Remember, everyone, what it's all about. It's all about living your best life and helping others do the same. And I'm just going to end again with one little video that's one of my favorites on hope, inspiration, growth, and healing.
Okay.
We're here to educate and empower patients to make choices that are best for them. We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high. Hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I was cannabis agnostic for many, many years. And the more research I did, the more I discovered that cannabis is this amazing medicine.
I was told that I had a 4-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctor really told me he couldn't do anything else. He gave me her name and she called me and she came to my house. She started to give me cannabis. My oncologist was puzzled because he couldn't find the cancer anymore.
All of the learning that we get comes from the Green Nurses Group, comes from their support, comes from their guidance. I trust everything that she says.
Simply meet people where they're at. The plant doesn't, stress to grow, so we don't stress to share it. We're healing people.
Cannabis has been used as a medicine for tens upon thousands of years. Here's the big message. Cannabis needs to be federally legal. We need to have laws that are the same across all 50 states that allow access to anyone and everyone who wants to utilize this powerful medicine.